We're here at the Whitfield Museum, which is behind me here, the Whitfield House, the oldest house built in Connecticut, still standing, stone house, and we'll explain about that in a minute. But we're mainly here to talk about Francis Bushnell, who came over, the oldest Bushnell to come to the U.S. in 1639. A lot of research has been done by my great-uncle George Eliezer Bushnell on the Bushnells in England. But he was not, despite finding many church records and so forth, really able to figure out just what the situation was. He found, I think it's 19 Bushnells of various generations in England before Francis. What the relations of some of them are is not very clear. Most of it is the only record is that they were baptized. When you go back 100 years or 150 years, Bushnell is spelled with 2 S's and 2 E's. But that was common in those days because that's the way they were writing a lot of words and so forth. So it's the same name. So the name had been around in Bushnell for quite a long, Bushnell name had been around for quite a long time. It may have come over with the Normandy invasion, but we won't really know that. And there's not too much that we know about those people in England. They were not of the nobility, and they were not peons. They were not field workers. They were tradesmen of one sort or another. Some were carpenters, maybe glaziers, people that do windows, traders, business people. Now Francis Bushnell was apparently fairly prosperous because for those that came to Guildford, the 25 signers of the covenant, most of them had to put up a lot of money. They had to rent the ship to bring them over. That was a month and a half or 2 months coming over, and then it had to go back. They had to get all the provisions and animals and seeds and enough to live on for at least a year, and their guns and their clothing and their furniture and their tools, and they had to load all that onto the ship. So this was an expensive undertaking to move to America and set up a colony that was going to be reasonably prosperous. So the people that were backing it had to have quite a lot of money, or they had to have the support of the government. And of course, one of the most interesting things that was going on in England at that time, and probably explains why the Bushnells came to the United States, is that King George, I guess it was the third, King George III, when he took over, broke with the Catholic Church, established the Church of England, not under the Pope, but under him. He claimed that he was the government by the divine right of kings, and he was the head of the church by divine right of kings. He closed the Parliament, and he ruled by decree. And this created a lot of problems in the society and in the church. And the Reverend Whitfield, whose house this is, and led the group, had a church for 25 years in the Church of England in Horsham, Sussex County in England. And I think the thing that sort of broke the back of a lot of people is that finally the king demanded that after the church services in the morning, all the churches, Church of England, had to provide military training for all the males up to maybe 40 or 50 years old in Sunday afternoon, because he wanted to get thousands of men trained up that he could send to fight his wars in Europe. And there were a lot of people that didn't like that idea because most of the people that went off to fight these wars in Europe never came back. So that I'm at least suspicious, and my great uncle was suspicious, that one of the things that then caused the break, because it was about 1630 that the king decreed this, that the reason the 5 Bushnell boys came in 1635 was to get away from this military requirement. And then at that time, the church that they were in, which Whitfield was the pastor of, and the church went after him because he was not promoting the military training and he was not promoting other things the king wanted. And he was several times subpoenaed to come to London and appear before the court, and which he might have had his head cut off, but he never went. And then he helped to organize this group to come to America. So they really came looking for religious and political freedom, more than for economic opportunity. And they had 3 lawyers in the group of 25, 3 or 4 clergymen, and other people that were not nobility, but were established in the society and had money in order to finance this trip. They boarded the Guilford. Francis' 5 sons were already in the new colonies, and he brought the 2 unmarried daughters that he had, Rebecca and Sarah, with him on the ship. While they were on the ship at sea, they decided to make a covenant among the 25 backers of this enterprise, and they drew up the Guilford Covenant, somewhat like the Mayflower Covenant, and signed it at sea. And right down the hill from where I'm standing now, you'll see the pictures of it, is a stone granite plaque, 27,000 tons of granite, that where the covenant is engraved and the names of the signers are engraved. That was inaugurated for the 375th year just in June. This is now July, a little over a month ago. I was here for the inauguration of the memorial for the covenant. Well, with that covenant, they arrived, they actually landed in New Haven. New Haven already existed. It was called Fairhaven. And apparently the St. John was the first ship, other than the ship that brought the people that founded New Haven, to arrive. And so the people in New Haven were very happy to see a ship coming from England. And they put them in touch with some Indians who owned this area, which is Guilford, a big area here between 2 of the rivers that run down into the Sound, Long Island Sound. And they bought this land from the Indians, paying with coats and tools and muskets and so forth that they had brought with them. No money, but money didn't mean anything in those days. Everything was just barter. And then they moved here in August of 1639. And one of the first things that they did is to go to work on this stone house, the Whitfield House behind us. And you can see you'll see it's a fairly solid building, built of stone. And it had 3 purposes. One, it was the house for Henry Whitfield, the pastor of their church and the leader of their expedition. Secondly, it was the church. It was where they came to worship until maybe a decade later when they got a time and around to building a church on the green. And third, it was their fort. And you can see that they have windows where they can sit with their muskets and fire downhill in back, downhill in front, downhill to the sides, if the Indians attack them. But the Indians here were friendly because they bought the land, or if the Dutch attacked. And that was the real threat in the 1600s, because the Dutch had a colony in New York. And through much of the 1600s, the Netherlands was at war with England. So the Dutch in New York would send raiding parties up the Sound, only a short boat ride. We never found any records of there actually being a major attack of the Dutch. But we know they were very much worried about that. So Francis then, we're not sure what role exactly Francis had in the community, because he doesn't appear much in the early records of Guilford. We did see in the library in Guilford, we saw the plot of how the land was divided early on, and we saw that he had about 3 acres at the northwest corner, just across the street on the northwest corner of the green. And then he had another plot a few blocks away, which was probably for raising animals or something. So he was probably trying to be a farmer, maybe a trader of agriculture things, or maybe sending wood back to England or something. We don't really know what he did. The Guilford colony was actually not an economic or financial success. And over time, there were a lot of problems, and a lot of the members went back to England. Partly because King George III died, and they got a king who was much more liberal, so the situation in England was more positive. One of the founders, whose name is on the covenant, John Hogley, married Sarah Bushnell, the younger daughter of Francis, and they had several children here in Guildford, but about in the early 1850s, he went back and he got a big church in Edinburgh, and later moved to the King's Court in London. Had more children there, but so there are none of the Hogley Bushnells stayed in this country. And in fact, Francis died in 1646. So he was only 7 years in Guildford before he died. Now he was, of course, not a young man when he came, because he already had his whole family, and his wife had died before he came. So I think that covers Francis, for this stage of Francis up until